could share and start your own watch party, that would be amazing.
I am trying to share mine right now.
And I'm definitely not technologically there yet, so I'm just gonna sit right here. But look, we are really excited today. We've got our friend Ryan Turner. We're hoping to hear as well from Brianna. We're going to talk about the role of young people. We're going to talk about some recent developments within the news. We're going to talk about what this movement means for Baltimore, and so much more. And could not be more excited to be with you. Just going to wait another 30 seconds here. Welcome a few more folks onto our Zoom. Again, if you could, please share yourself a watch party, host a watch party, and share the feed.
Zeke, apparently I am not technologically savvy either. I'm trying to get it. I'm trying to share it. I'm making progress here.
All right.
All righty.
All right. Well, look, you ready, Melissa?
I'm ready.
All right, let's do it. So again, welcome to Truth and Healing. We are a weekly show. We are focused on the Baltimore City Healing City Act and the movement that it spurred, and the possibility of eradicating trauma across our city and creating a Baltimore that is just and decent and healing. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melissa for a quick minute, and then we're going to bring on our guests.
All righty. So I've been reflecting since last week's episode. Have you been reflecting, Zeke?
Indeed.
And, you know, some of the things that I've been thinking about are, first and foremost, just how proactive we are in this city. And it feels like a really, really good time to be a Baltimorean. I am very, very proud to say that I live in this amazing city. And, of course, the dopest district in the entire city. And I'm
better say that.
Of course. As a social worker, you know, civil rights and activism, these are things that are important to me and have been important to me for a very, very long time. And so, like, I've been reflecting on last week's conversation, and it's really made me excited about tonight's conversation because of the youth focus. Young people historically have always been at the forefront of movements. We're talking about from the 1960s, when young people were involved in the civil rights era, you know, and it wasn't anything against the elders, but young people were the ones who were bold enough to say, we're not having it. And that's exactly what we're seeing today. And so I'm just really proud of what the young folks are doing. I learned from the young people quite a bit. Not that I'm old, but, you know, I'm in a different era than they are. So anyway, I am really excited, and I hope that you all are excited as well about tonight's conversation.
Awesome. So with that, we're going to bring our guests into the chat. I know that Ms. Brianna Harris is having a few technical challenges, but we have with us Ryan Turner, and we're going to bring him in right now. Hey, Ryan, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing wonderful. So Ryan Turner, for those that do not know, is the executive director of CLIA, which is Community Law in Action. They are an extremely dope youth advocacy group. They learn all about the Constitution and the laws. They do direct action. They organize. They're a group that I've been really proud to work with over the past couple of years. And we are excited to have Ryan as a definite part of our Healing City movement. Yes. And also excited to have you on Truth and Healing. So welcome.
It's such a pleasure to be here and to work alongside such magnificent folks, Councilman Cohen and Dr. Buckley. You all have certainly been champions in terms of facilitating the process of healing in this city. We have a long way to go, but we have done so much in terms of the Healing City movement. So I want to thank you all for having me on tonight, and I do certainly look forward to this evening's conversation.
Absolutely. Well, look, let's just get started with, tell us a little bit about who you are, how you grew up, and what drew you into this work that you now do with young people.
Yeah, so I am originally from Baltimore. Some people say I have a little accent, so they think I'm from down south. But no, I'm from Baltimore, born and raised, west side of Baltimore. And I was raised by a single mother, and it was just my brother and I. Had the blessed opportunity to be able to go away to school for a while down to Hampton University. And it was there that I began to understand and learn what this thing called social justice was. I had the opportunity my freshman and sophomore year to participate in the Children's Defense Fund Freedom Schools. And it was such a powerful, powerful opportunity. And of course, through that, in networking, you hear folks say, hey, I'm majoring in sociology, or I'm majoring in criminal justice, I'm majoring in psychology. And when folks say sociology, I was like, so what? And so I started to do some research on, what those particular areas of study were, what does it mean to study criminal justice, sociology, and psychology. I was so enamored by the ideas of it that I came back to school and I changed my major to psychology and sociology from public relations. And from there, I really got enthralled with serving my community. I came back home to Baltimore in about 2011, and I looked around and I was like, I gotta do something, right? I had this new perspective from being away and having the experiences that I had while I was down in Hampton and having the experiences that I had when I was in Freedom School. And I said, now I have a responsibility, right? Not to just have this knowledge and hoard this knowledge, but I have to help my community. And so I ended up actually starting a nonprofit. I had no idea how to start a nonprofit, run a nonprofit, or what have you. But my heart said, I can't sit on the sidelines and allow folks in my community where I am from to live anything beneath what they were called and designed to live for and to be. And so my goal, my task, my purpose had then become to help our community citizens, help my fellow brothers and sisters to remove life's barriers that hindered them from moving and progressing in the ways that they needed to. And I've been doing it ever since. I started my nonprofit, worked it for a few years, and then had the blessed opportunity to become executive director of CLEA, where I continue to work with the dynamic young people that we have fighting for so many causes that are important.
Wow. You mentioned, of course, that you are from West Baltimore. By the way, sir, what university did you complete your studies at?
The Coppin State University.
Coppin.
Coppin. Yeah.
Yes. So, you are, you're a part of the fabric of this city. So what does it feel like for you being a member of Healing City Baltimore, the steering committee, and also being a child born and raised in this city? Like, how does this, tell us what that means for you, because I think that's important.
Yeah, my participation in Healing City and all of the things that I do here in Baltimore, it's very personal. It's extremely personal to me. Like I said, having grown up in a single parent household where my mother struggled to keep my brother and I from, being, shot down in the street and, in a gang or whatever the case is. It's very personal. And because I had a village, a mom around me who was super strict, we call her the warden. That's my mom's nickname. It's the warden in the family, right? Because I had a caring mother, a loving mother that facilitated that process for me. I felt the need to be able to show up and be present for all the other caring moms, for all the other caring families, for all the other, young Black boys and young Black girls, who look like me, to have an opportunity. So it's deeply personal.
Mm-hmm. And so just thinking about the fact that, this is a movement. Is it safe then to say that the movement was birthed in you long before you came to Healing City?
Oh yeah, this work it is my calling.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand a calling to be something that you would do it without being paid. And I can unequivocally say that the work that I do, I would absolutely, without a doubt, do it without being paid, because it is my belief that we all have the deserve to live a life, right, that allows us to be happy, free, and to exist in our callings. And so that is that's how I exist in the work that I do.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So, Ryan, if I could jump in, so in hearing your story and in knowing you for a little while, always inspired by what you do with and for young people and just your general sort of role within our community. But thinking about, what you said, growing up with a single mother in West Baltimore, mm-hmm. and in a city where we know the outcomes for most Black boys and young men growing up with a single mother are not good. And thinking about all the ways in which systemically we've made your reality, what you were able to achieve and accomplish, a rarity and not the norm, right? We have made it something that sadly few people are able to attain. And so we hold you up as a beacon, which you are, because you're great. But, just in thinking about a Baltimore where, again, we see really unbelievably high level of homicides. We see health outcomes and indicators where if you grow up in parts of West Baltimore, you can live 20 years less than if you grew up in parts of North Baltimore, a city where we know still, even with some of the heroic work that's gone on, that our educational outcomes continue to struggle, where poverty remains such an oppressive force in the lives of so many, where lead poisoning is still a reality in 2020. I'm curious, as you think about your own journey, how we lower the barriers. And I think about this as a city councilman, but how do we create so that you are not the rarity, you are not the one in however many, but that your story of growing up, having a decent life, becoming a leader and an executive director is the norm?
Yeah, the fact of the matter is that I'm not and shouldn't be an anomaly, right? There are so many folks who, so many young Black boys, so many young Black girls who have so much inside of them, mm-hmm. right? Who have so much power, who have so much promise, who have so much future inside of them. And quite honestly, in order for folks, for me to not be an outlier, if you will, we got to be direct in the way that we address what's going on, right? We have to be a very direct in our conversations related to systemic racism, right? And how that impacts our young folks. We have to be very direct in our dialogue, in our conversation around access to opportunity that are offered to Black children and children of color in this city. We have to be willing to talk about what I believe has been I guess, the elephant in the room for all of these years, talking around it and dancing around it. But it is not going to be until or unless, right, we begin to have very direct and pointed conversations around how we have failed our Black boys and girls in this city, that we will begin to see these kinds of situations turned around. So transparency must be key, and being very direct and pointed in the way that we address, and not passively, but quite directly.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, last week we kind of touched on ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and there's a long list of criterion. And you know, the nationwide average is under 50%. So for our viewers, adverse childhood experiences are things that a child experiences that makes it difficult for them to grow and mature and integrate life, you know, as they progress through each developmental phase. So again, the nationwide average is below 50%. Do you want to take a guess what the average is here in Baltimore City? It's under 60. So we have surpassed the nation's percentage.
Yep.
And so when we encounter young people like yourself and Brianna and the countless others, I mean, we don't want to harp on the fact that, wow, this is amazing what Ryan did, but we have no choice because we know that the odds were against you from the very beginning.
And to that point, one of the things that, you know, that I often lift up is that our children, there's this phrase that we use to refer to our children in school. I think the light of the Lord is on me right now.
Hey!
Oh God. But we use this term, right, to say that our children are resilient. Our young folks are resilient. And to some degree, I think that in using that term resilient, that we have normalized the trauma of our young folks. And I think that oftentimes we have young folks who are in classrooms who have gone through so much from the time they left the school building, right, to the time they went home and all throughout the night. I had a student in the third grade in my former program who had come back to the program on a Monday, and it was over like Labor Day weekend. And he said, "Hey, Mr. Turner, what's going on?" I was like, "Hey, how was your weekend?" He was like, "Oh, it was okay. I was down at the park and I just heard some shooting and my brother took me behind the tree." And so, I mean, I immediately go into the zone, like, "Are you okay? What's up?" And so I had to back up. You know, I didn't want to, you know, frighten him or whatever the case is, or heighten. But the fact that these kinds of things are normalized, right? And our children are sitting in these classrooms having traumatized situations and circumstances that have not been properly addressed. And we cover it, I believe, by calling them resilient.
Yes, indeed.
Right, by calling them strong, right? That we don't put the proper structures in place, the proper resources. Let's say that the proper resources, right? And I know we're going to talk about like defunding the police and all these kinds of things, but I think that in terms of the way we allocate funds in our education system, right, definitely needs to be addressed. And Lord, let me not go down that train, okay? But there needs to be, right, like these supports available for our young people within schools, and we need to properly address the trauma that's going on in our classroom. And furthermore, not demonize surface level behaviors, right, when there's more of a root cause underneath that. And so oftentimes when we look at the discipline, right, disciplining young Black boys and Black girls within our school systems, right, we say, "Oh, they're outlandish, oh, they're loud, oh, they're this and they're that." Having disciplining that surface level behavior, but not even knowing what is beneath that. There's a poem that a student wrote, and I think that many people might be familiar with it. It's called "Cause I Ain't Got a Pencil," right? And basically, what the author is saying is that, you know, I've had to go through so many things in preparation of going to school. My lights were out. I had to get my siblings ready. I had to cook dinner. Had to iron their clothes and mine. I get to school and the teacher is on my back because I ain't got a pencil. The first thing you think about, or the first thing you do is discipline, right? When I have all of this going on, we got to address that.
Yes.
And not to mention that when you're in fight or flight mode and you're experiencing hyperarousal in your prefrontal cortex, and you can't focus, you can't sit down and learn and absorb knowledge and information. You can't have healthy, normalized relationships. If that's your constant state and you're constantly feeling overwhelmed, the ability to achieve and do well and have a normalized life is incredibly stressed. And I think, Ryan, to your point earlier, I think you're right. There is a normalization. When I was a teacher, there was all this discourse around the idea of grit. And the idea was like, I think it was a researcher, Duckworth, that did this study on grit. And the theory was the more that grit can be elastic, that people can become grittier and tougher. And so the idea was, if we could just get our students to be more gritty, then they could achieve, and we would close what we then called achievement gap. The reality is that I think the grit discourse and the resilience discourse really erases the endemic racism that has gone into years and decades and centuries of public policies that have disproportionately harmed Black and brown kids, that have dislocated and disproportionately caused trauma in Black and brown neighborhoods. So the idea of if we could just make our kids a little more tough is nonsense, because to your point, just to get up, just to not have a pencil, to not maybe have had breakfast that morning, to be witness to violence in a park over the weekend and not be able to live in that emotion and grieve and everything else. I think that the grit, toughness, resilience discourse, to your point, has really failed kids, and it needs to be about policy changes and reallocation of resources.
Exactly.
And perhaps at some point in this city too, we need to talk about reparations and what that means, and at least begin that conversation. Because, I was thinking about this over the weekend. In my district, there's a Christopher Columbus statue over toward Little Italy. And for some folks within our Italian community, there is a strong cultural identification with Christopher Columbus. He is seen as one of these icons that, in many ways was an early pioneer for the community. However, we also know that Christopher Columbus was a slaver and enacted, whether it was genocide or mass murder, whatever you want to call it, that his treatment of native populations was unbelievably cruel and immoral and unjust, regardless of the time period you're in. We also know that he didn't really discover America, and that, in all honesty, he wasn't even probably Italian. Italy wasn't a country then. And so, for, I think, Native people in this country, for other communities of color, for really all of us, the idea that we venerate Columbus, I think, is so anathema to a conversation around equity and around building stronger people. And I just think we're in this moment right now where we have a real opportunity to tell a more honest history, to figure out whose achievements and accomplishments we want to lionize and deify and lift up and create statues of, or if we just don't want to put people on statues anymore, because that's kind of strange. But we have a real opportunity to acknowledge the ways in which our history in this country and in this city are so deeply tortured and mistold, and in many cases untrue. And I think, as we were having this conversation about what to do about the statue and how can we potentially get it down, from off of that pedestal, I think part of the other conversation we need to have is that what could we put up in its place, right? How can we imagine a city or a country that does speak to our values, that is inclusive, that is built around equity instead of genocide and mass murder? So I'm curious you all's reaction as we're sort of in this moment where we're having to rethink our icons. It was the Confederate monuments, and now more and more monuments. How do we as a city, how do we as a community, how does Healing City think about this very, I think, unique space that we are in and the opportunity that it presents?
There was a very viral video that went around, I think it was sometime last week, of a gentleman I believe he was in New Orleans, and the discussion was
district meeting.
At the school district meeting, and I mean, he read her rights.
Oh, yes, he did.
He read them.
Yes, he did.
But it was so poignant in that, one.
Sorry. Tell the story. I missed the video somehow.
And so, well, just by way of synopsis, during the school board meeting, there was discussion around changing the name of a school, and I believe the school was the school named after Robert E. Lee. I think the school was named after.
I think so. Mm-hmm.
And I think that the first part of the first name of the school was dropped off, but the name Lee was still on there. And so there was an outcry with the community to have that removed. And if you are going to name a building or an establishment after someone in history, let's be on the right side of it, right? Let's lift up folks who have fought for equity. Let's memorialize folks who are on the right side of history, and not memorialize people who have been for genocide and racism, systemic racism, all these different kinds of things. And one of the board members who was there was like shopping.
Literally, she was shopping, online shopping. She was not engaged in the discussion, which was why, I mean, it's alarming. Surely we've all been in meetings where, you get distracted, but this was such an emotionally charged meeting, particularly for the period of time that we're in. And for her to be so disrespectful to the students, forget the adults that are there. You're there for the students, but you would rather to shop. And so one of the constituents, go ahead, Ryan.
Yeah. So one of the constituents, he stood, and I can't begin to encapsulate all of what he said, because he was so eloquent in the way that he poured it out. But basically, his discourse was around, if you're going to memorialize buildings and have statues and these kinds of things, it needs to be folks who've been on the right side of history. And I think that in terms of the way we think about monuments and school buildings, it needs to be representative of who lives here. Right? The Black and brown children who walk into the corridors of these buildings, these school buildings need to be named after powerful figures in our own history. And I think that one of the biggest slaps in the face that I have experienced, and Black and brown kids have experienced in the city and around this country, is experiencing a curriculum that did not teach us about who we were. We just celebrated Juneteenth, which was on June 19th. Juneteenth is nothing new. Nothing new at all. We all understand of what would happen in, Galveston, Texas, and these kinds of things. However, many of us learned about Juneteenth within maybe the last 2 years, 3 years, and some even just learned about it because of all of what's going on in our country now. And I think that it is an extreme disgrace that we are reared and raised in a curriculum within our school systems who do not teach us who we are. Right. And to your point about Columbus, I think it's even more of a slap in the face that we have been tested on lies. The standards of our competency have been tested and weighed against lies in history that have been perpetuated down through the years. And it is time for that to be done. right? It is time. And this is why, listen, this is why I'm so excited to work at CLEA. This is why I'm excited to work with young people who lift their voices, raise their voices, because it's like, no, we're not asking for permission anymore. We are completely demanding that you stop feeding us lies.
You know, I think that I mentioned earlier about adverse childhood experiences. So here it is, some young people are coming into schools with these realities, right? And then on top of that, they are being taught lies. And so at what point in time do they get the full context of their Blackness, of their brownness? You know, I remember there was, I think it was in October, one of the hearings at City Council, Davon Love eloquently spoke about, and for those listening, Davon Love is of Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. And he spoke about the challenges around the absence of identity, racial identity in the curriculum, and how harmful that is when you couple that with everything else that young people are dealing with. And so, yes, we do have a responsibility to speak out and to speak up and to, this will hurt some feelings, but to tear down monuments, whether or not they are physical monuments or the monuments that are embedded in policy. We must eradicate, tear them down.
Yeah, and causing people to be comfortable anymore is just not a thing for me. It's not a thing at all. Like I don't care about your comfort because right is right and wrong is wrong, and that's on period. Like kids, that's on period, right? Like that's just it.
And then, you know, and to that, let's tear them down and then let's build something beautiful in their place that is who we are. You know, one of the suggestions that's actually come up for our Columbus Monument would be some kind of unity or healing pavilion where you represented all the groups that have lived in that part of East Baltimore. So the Lumbee Indians, the Jews for a while as they traversed up Lombard, Black folks who we know were brought onto those shores in chains, the Italian community. We are a city and a district of immigrants and of native born people. And so that's what we should talk about, not Christopher Columbus, who came here to enslave people and put them in chains and murder them left, right, and center. And so I do think this is that moment where we got to have the political courage. We got to be able to be honest with folks, because that's part of, you know, when I walk into a community meeting and folks are screaming and yelling about how dare we disrespect the Italian heritage and the history. But to be honest and say that we, in this city, we love our Italian-American community. They contributed the D'Alessandros and Nancy Pelosi and just an incredibly rich cultural fabric that is an enormous testament to just the incredible thing that is Baltimore. And it's sort of all of these communities coming together. But we don't have to celebrate Columbus. We don't have to honor Confederate traitors. We don't have to lift up genocideers and slavers. We can be a better city than that. One other thing I want to talk to you all about. So related to the Healing City Act and the work around reimagining, whether it's defund, but reimagining, whether it's abolition, reimagining a police force that's really a public safety force, and where we're not using police officers who have guns and the ability to take away one's life and liberty, where we're not using them to do things for which they were not trained and they are not equipped. And we see time and time again that they are not meant to do, such as solve mental health crises. Last night, there was an incident in Northeast Baltimore where police were called. A gentleman reported that his relative was having a behavioral crisis and a mental health crisis. Police showed up on scene The gentleman was perceived to have a gun. He, according to the police, reached for his gun and police shot him multiple times. He is now in critical condition in the hospital. I should say the body cam footage has not been released, so there is no definitive account of what happened. But to me, when I think about someone who may lose their life, who may spend the rest of their life in pain, that could there have been a way to avoid this? And as we think about our budget as this moral document, as we think about the types of policies that will shape a Baltimore where Ryan is not the exception but the norm, could we imagine a world in which we do these types of interventions differently?
Yeah, I think it is vitally important that we put community care back into the hands of the community. I remember hearing stories that my grandmother would talk about, and even my mother would talk about around, we would walk down the street and go to the store and leave our doors unlocked. There was this sense of community. My grandfather, God rest his soul, David Hollingsworth, he was in the Baltimore City Police Department for about 35 years. And he was a police officer who lived in the city and cared about the city. And for him, it was a matter of, I'm looking out for my own. I'm looking out for my community where I live. And it is going to be, for us moving forward, I think that in putting community care back into the hands of the community, it will take this holistic approach, right? Where we are pouring resources into mental health organizations, into youth-led organizations, because understand, our young people, they got the steam, they got the fire, and they got the power to be able to move our communities forward to where we need to be. They just need those resources. And so there needs to be a reallocation of these funds so that we can take a holistic approach to healing our communities.
Yes, indeed. I wish we had more time to really delve even deeper into that, because I would love to hear your ideas, like about, and I'm sure you have specific ideas about what that would look like how, if we are pouring the money into the youth as we should be doing, what would that look like? Are we sending all of our money to CLIA?
Sure. That's my ED hat. Okay.
But yeah, what does that look like? People are afraid. I think that people don't understand that defunding does not mean getting rid of the police. We have to really make that very clear distinction.
But there has to be equity in funding. And right now, there is not equity in funding, especially for Black-led organizations. There is not the access to capital that we need in order to move our communities forward is simply not there. And so until there is equity in funding for nonprofit organizations, and specifically grassroots nonprofit organizations who are close to the problem, right, who are close to the issues, who have the social clout in the communities to be able to really solve and address these issues. And right now, what I'm saying is that I think, I may get in trouble, but hey, I think that, some folks don't want to solve the issue. I'll put it like that. Some folks, there may be just a drop in the bucket to say, hey, we're collecting data for this or whatever the case is. But if you really want to solve some issues, place the capital where it needs to be in order for us to be able to solve the issues, and in a long-term and sustainable way.
Absolutely. Zeke, we are at 7:41. Do we have time, or are you cutting us off?
I mean, can we gotta end with at least do the ending question. That's our jam. So
that's right.
You want to pop the ending question?
Sure thing. So Ryan, as a member, well, first of all, as a son of Baltimore, as an alum of the esteemed Coppin State University, as a vital member of the Healing City Baltimore team.
That's right. Proud.
We want to know from you, what does a Healing City Baltimore actually look like?
So a Healing City Baltimore looks like a city where we have agreed values, we have common values that lead us into a very prosperous and a very equitable future. It is a city where we understand unconditional positive regard. We understand what it is to be fair and just. We understand what it is to be transparent, and we understand what it is to be loving. We understand what it means to come together as a community, and we understand this concept of Ubuntu. And this concept of Ubuntu suggests that when I struggle, you struggle. When you are happy, I am happy, right? We must understand that we walk hand in hand, lockstep together. And until and unless we get to that place, and I believe that we do have the power to get to that place. When we actualize that, that is when we will be a thriving healing city. And I have to continue to give much appreciation to Zeke and to you, Dr. Buckley, and to the entire Healing City team, right, for pushing this vision forward. Because when we sit around those tables and in these Healing City meetings and push forward the initiatives that we do, there is this synergy, right, that is around the table that I believe can permeate around the entire city of Baltimore, that has the power to be able to reverberate across this country, right, across the nation, across the world. So that's healing for me.
That's beautiful. And let me just say that I think part of what we're trying to do with Truth and Healing is expose folks to different voices in our city who are already doing the work, who are already healers, if you will. And Ryan Turner is such a perfect example of that. Someone who wears his heart on his sleeve, who is always there for the young people, and who's been a really critical part as well of the Healing City movement. And so it is always a pleasure to see you by Zoom. But I do want to thank you for coming on. The work that you're doing, I think, speaks for itself, but I'm going to speak for it too, because I used to be in the youth organizing space. CLIA is the real deal. They are truly producing a generation of legal scholars and activists and advocates and policymakers, and it's incredibly impressive work. It's a Black-led organization. You're seeing the ED right now. He is true blue, as they say, and it's just an honor and pleasure to have you hanging out with us here tonight.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Really do.
And do you want to just plug your social media and all that stuff for CLIA?
Sure, definitely. I wouldn't be an ED if I didn't, right? So folks can go to www.cliayouth.org. That's where they can find us on the web, and where they can also make donations. So choose to make donations. And then on Instagram, you can find us at CLIA at CLIA Youth, and we're also CLIA Youth on Facebook.
My man. All right, good deal. Well, look, hope to have you back soon. And again, thanks for coming, and thank you to all the folks that tuned in tonight. Talked with our friend Ryan, and keep this conversation about healing Baltimore moving forward. We will be back next Wednesday, same time, same place, same Zoom, 7 p.m. And close this out, Dr. Buckley.
All right. Well, folks, we definitely look forward to seeing you. Don't forget, we need you to host watch parties and start inviting your friends right now so that they can be here next week. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Zeke. Thank you, all of you. Take good care of yourselves. Peace.
See ya.